Jin finally opened up. What is really going on behind Jungkook's cold gaze and Taehyung's strange attitude when they meet briefly before returning to the military camp? Is BTS's friendship really on the edge? And why did Jin look gloomy after the secret conversation with Jungkook? Army, you're not ready for the truth to be revealed that night. Jin finally opened up. Jungkook and Taehyung. This is what happened. Something's changed. Not only from the way they looked at each other, but from the way the world began to question, are BTS still one heart? As the night begins to fall and the cameras are no longer on, the two big names of the group that has rocked the world, Jungkook and Taehyung, stand quietly in a silent corner before they return to the military obligations that separate them from the stage. But what is surprising is not that silence. Instead of the quiet words that came out of Jungkook's mouth as he looked at Jin with watery eyes, "Hyung, I didn't want this to happen." What really happened between them? The meeting was supposed to be a brief moment full of warmth, but instead left many questions and wounds that are not visible. Jin, the eldest Hyung, who had been trying to be a counterweight in the storm, finally spoke up. And his statement is more shocking than anything the army could have ever imagined. That we pull back a little. A few days before the incident, Jungkook and Taehyung's military schedules were mysteriously synchronized so they could meet, he said, just for evaluation. But is that really all? Or is there a special order from above that encourages them to come face to face? And why is it that while HYB's built-in camera filmed part of the meeting, only half of the video was released to the public? At that moment, Jungkook stood with his hands clenched into a fist, his gaze distant, as if trying to restrain the accumulated emotions. Taehyung, on the other hand, looks cold, not out of anger, but out of hurt. No hugs, no warm smiles. Only long silence and distance cannot be bridged. Then, Jin came. After receiving permission to attend the meeting as a form of moral support, Jin attended with a serious expression. Many of the staff thought Jin would just say hello and then come back. But what happened was beyond expectations. Jungkook pulls Jin to the side of the room. They talk, quietly, confidentially, and obviously emotionally stressful. Army, who was present at the scene, could hear a faint murmur as the door opened for a moment. "I feel like a failure as a younger brother, Hyung, but I'm also human." What does Jungkook mean? What has he been hiding all this time? Jin finally opened his voice when asked by an internal HYB staff member in an off-record session. What happened between them was not just a misunderstanding. These are old wounds that never really heal. Jin said with a long sigh. Where did the wound come from? Some sources say that since before the draft, there was a major conflict between Jungkook and Taehyung regarding their respective solo career decisions. Taehyung feels ignored by the system, while Jungkook is accused of following the agency's plan. As Jungkook gained more international spotlight, Taehyung reportedly began to keep his distance not out of hate, but out of disappointment. But the conflict was never really discussed, only muted. And when two people with deep wounds meet in a stressful situation like the military, all can explode. Jin said, "I see Jungkook wants to finish this, but doesn't know how. He loves Taehyung very much, but also feels accused for things he never asked for." What about Taehyung? A military insider who had interacted with them said that Taehyung had said something that made an impression on the staff. "I came, not to make peace. I came because I wanted to know why he was silent." Silence is meant? Did Jungkook ever hide anything? Suddenly the public recalled Jungkook's old interview before entering the military. At that time he said, "There are things I will say, but maybe after I return." At that time the sentence was considered mysterious. Many even thought it was related to his personal life. But now, after the meeting, speculation leads to a relationship between him and Taehyung. That a sentence from Jin shocked everyone. When she was finally interviewed in an internal program that leaked to the public, she said calmly but heavily, "Sometimes, even families can hurt without intention. But if no one wants to talk, the pain becomes eternal." The big question arises, is this the beginning of BTS's real emotional breakup? Because after the incident, there was no official news, no posts, Even their social accounts are silent. Jin himself reportedly locked himself up for 2 days before reappearing for military exercises. What did Jungkook actually say to Jin? According to one of the staffers who overheard the conversation from behind the door, Jungkook said, "If I could turn back time, I would have talked to him in the first place. But I'm afraid, I'm afraid he'll leave." Not only was the sentence heartrending, but it also signified that their quarrel was not just an ordinary quarrel. This is the fear of loss. Fear of the breakdown of relationships that have been built for more than a decade. And when the genie was asked to conclude the meeting, he said only one thing: they have not yet made peace. But they have already begun to stare at the same wounds. Armies around the world can now only ask, will this be a dark chapter in BTS's journey? Or is it a turning point that will strengthen them again? One thing's for sure, that night wasn't just about two soldiers meeting. It's about two best friends who almost lost each other, and a Hyung who stands in the middle, trying to be the bridge between two broken hearts. And maybe, just maybe, this is the beginning of a confession that could change everything. The question is whether they will talk to us or let time answer everything. When the night was over, there was no hug, no greeting that implied completion. Only Jungkook's back moved away from the room, and Taehyung remained standing stiffly in place. Jin, who had come hoping to mediate, finally chose not to say anything more. Not because he didn't want to, but because he knew whatever he said would probably sound like it justified one of them. Then, why did Jungkook choose Jin as the place to vent his confession? Does Jin know something that even Taehyung doesn't know? Or is there a message Jungkook wants to convey to Taehyung, but couldn't he just say it? One of the clues came from a handwriting found by military staff in Jungkook's personal locker. The shabby paper contained only one sentence: "I was too afraid to hurt her, so I chose silence, and it turned out that my silence hurt her more than anything." No name, no signature. But the time of writing is adjacent to that night. Is that a confession? Or regret? ARMY began to recall the days before BTS served in the military. At that moment, the difference in vision between the members had already begun to be seen. Some choose to focus more on solo albums, some just want to vacuum for a moment from the entertainment world. But who would have thought that behind all those sweet statements, there was a wound that kept extending, and that finally broke in that silent night? What was surprising was Jin's reaction after the meeting. Usually, a genie is a figure who hides inner pressure with jokes and laughter. But that day was different. After leaving the room where Jungkook and Taehyung's meeting took place, Jin did not immediately return to the barracks. He sat alone outside the building, staring at the empty night sky, as if looking for an answer that did not come from anyone's mouth. Some soldiers reported seeing Jin crying. Not crying like a sad person, but like someone who has just realized that the two sisters he loves may be on the verge of losing each other. "Sometimes we think love is enough," Jin said in a secret interview that was eventually leaked. "But sometimes, precisely because we love each other, we become afraid of hurting. And that fear is what keeps us away from each other." And that night, for the first time, Jin wrote a long message in his journal. A private note that was never intended for the public. But one sentence leaked to the internal media: "I hope one day they read this and know that I never give up on seeing them laugh together again." However, if Jin doesn't give up, do Jungkook and Taehyung feel the same way? Because according to some sources, after the meeting, Taehyung didn't talk to anyone for 3 days. He avoids all social interactions, even refusing to participate in collective exercises for health reasons. One of the military trainers who saw him said, "He looks like someone who just lost his house." And even more surprising is the fact that Jungkook had asked to move units just 1 week after the incident. The request was denied, but the intent of the request was clear. Jungkook wanted to stay away. But why? Is it because of guilt? Or for fear of a follow-up conversation that might be more painful? Many do not know that before the meeting took place, Jin had received a letter from Taehyung. A letter sent personally, not from the military, but from a private address that even HYB staff was unfamiliar with. The contents of the letter remain a mystery to this day. But from a source who had seen it, The contents of the letter were full of longing and anger. "I don't know if he's ever really seen me. I stood by him for years, but sometimes I felt like a shadow that he never noticed." That sentence made Jin flinch. He knew how deep their relationship was. From the togetherness on stage to the silent moments backstage, they are like two sides of a coin. But perhaps it is precisely because it is too close, the sense of disappointment becomes There is nothing more painful than the fact that a relationship that has been established for years is now on the edge. Some people might think that this is a small problem that can be solved with time, but not for Jin, Jungkook, and Taehyung. They're not just friends, they're family. But sometimes, in families, the invisible wounds are much deeper than they seem. Jin's decision to open his voice became something that was highly anticipated by the public. Previously, he was known for his attitude that always kept his distance from internal issues. But this time, something was different. Jin, who is famous for his humorous and sociable nature, now seems more serious than ever. Every word that came out of his mouth felt so full of meaning, as if he was trying to express something that had been held back. What happened that night can't just be described in words, Jin said in a private conversation with several close people. "But you should know that I really want to help them both. I want them back to the way they were, like family." However, the statement actually raises more questions. If Jin cares so much, why can't he prevent a showdown between Jungkook and Taehyung? Why did he let everything get worse and worse before finally speaking up? This is a question that continues to haunt the ARMY, who feel disappointed by their inability to find out more about what really happened. Many believe that Jungkook and Taehyung's relationship has changed since their military training. Some observers noted a change in Taehyung's attitude, which was previously so open and expressive, has now become more closed. While Jungkook, who is known to be very quiet and serious, looks increasingly depressed. This, of course, adds to speculation that something bigger is going on behind the scenes. However, is this dispute really just about a difference in attitude, or is there something deeper? Several people close to them mentioned that there had been growing tension since Jungkook and Taehyung began preparing to return to the military camp. Those who have been following BTS for a long time begin to feel that something is wrong. Even from the gestures and words they say when talking to each other, in the midst of all this, there was an even bigger surprise. Jungkook had actually felt the tension long before that night. According to a source close to Jungkook, when the two met before leaving, Jungkook said in a barely audible voice, "I didn't want this to happen." The sentence may sound familiar to some, but for those who know Jungkook well, it is a very profound confession. Does that mean he feels guilty? Asks an observer. Or is there something more? Isn't Jungkook always trying to keep his distance with personal matters? So, why did he want to open up to Jin this time? The source continued, Jungkook always felt that he was the one who had to take responsibility for whatever happened. She often feels trapped between the role of Magne, who must keep the peace, and the desire to be more open with her friends. It was a heavy burden. Jungkook, who has been known to be very careful, turns out to have a lot of thoughts that have been held back. He finds it difficult to speak directly to Taehyung, who he considers to be more open in expressing feelings. However, during the meeting, Jungkook revealed one thing that surprised many. He was afraid of losing Taehyung. He feels like Taehyung is changed, the source added. There was a fear in him that was inexpressible. Jungkook fears that as they get closer to military time, they may never be the same again. That's what makes him feel cornered. And indeed, in their last interview together, despite Jungkook and Taehyung trying to show maturity, there was an inexpressible tension. Taehyung, who is known for his cheerful and loving nature, is now seen to be harboring something deeper. Many felt that they wanted to reveal more, but were afraid to offend Jungkook, or perhaps feared that everything they had built would simply fall apart. But isn't that a big dilemma? Did the